My name is Tessa Rowan. I'm 31. I live in Oakland and I build energy systems. This morning, I stared at a text from my older brother, Nate. It was short, sharp, and exactly what I expected. He said it would be best if I didn't come to Dad's birthday party tonight. He added something about keeping the night peaceful and not making things awkward, as if my presence was a disruption, not a person, as if I were a leak in their perfect family roof they've decided to ignore instead of fix. Dad's turning 65. They're throwing the party at the Winmore Club in San Francisco where everyone shows up to be seen. Politicians, investors, tech families, you name it. It's the kind of place where you raise a glass not just to someone's health but to their relevance. I haven't seen most of them since I was 24. That was the year I said no. No to the job, no to the office with my name on the door, no to the expectation that I would follow exactly in Dad's footsteps and spend the rest of my life proving I could be half the man he was. When I said no, the phone calls stopped, the emails dried up, and the family dinners that used to be mandatory quietly carried on without me. It wasn't a loud breakup. That's what stings the most. No dramatic argument, no door slamming, no speeches about betrayal. Just stillness. Like I disappeared and they didn't want to admit they noticed. Sometimes silence feels worse than hate. At least hate admits you exist. I sat at the edge of my bed holding my phone rereading Nate's message. There wasn't even a hello, just a reminder of my place. Or lack of it. I used to try. For years, I sent messages on holidays. I mailed gifts to my half-sister's kids, even though I wasn't sure she told them who they were from. I kept thinking maybe something would shift if I stayed kind, if I stayed steady, but kindness didn't open any doors. It just gave them more quiet space to walk away from me. I'm not angry. At least I don't think I am. But every now and then, like this morning, I feel the old ache like a bruise that never healed right, and I wonder what they tell people about me. Probably that I'm the one who chose to leave, that I abandoned the family business, that I didn't want the legacy, and technically that's true, but it misses everything that mattered. I didn't walk away from my family, I walked towards something of my own. I just didn't know it would cost me every version of belonging I had left. Outside my apartment window, the street was already heating up under the June sun. A woman passed by with a stroller, a man chased after a bus. I watched them and felt entirely separate from it all, like I was on the other side of glass. It's strange how fast you can become a ghost to people you used to see every day. One decision and suddenly you're invisible in their photographs, cropped out of memory. There's a picture of me and Dad from my high school graduation. I'm in a white dress, he's in a dark gray suit, and his hand rests lightly on my shoulder. That was before he stopped seeing me as his daughter and started seeing me as a choice he didn't agree with. I keep that photo in a drawer, not because I want to remember who we were, but because part of me still hopes I can return to it. Not as the same person, but as someone he could one day be proud of again. That hope has thinned over time, especially when messages like Nate's arrive to remind me how far I've fallen in their eyes. I tucked the phone into my nightstand and took a deep breath. The apartment was quiet. No champagne flutes clinking, no music, no staged toasts or choreographed applause, just the hum of my own life. Mine, not his. And yet there's still that small part of me that wonders what would happen if I walked in tonight uninvited. Would he look at me? Would he even recognize who I've become? I used to think time would fix this, that maybe distance would soften their judgment. But sometimes the only thing distance does is make you forget how much it once hurt to be erased. Tonight they'll raise their glasses to him. They'll talk about what he built, what he meant to the industry, and I'll be here unseen, still building. But that's okay, because I know something now I didn't know then. You don't need their spotlight to shine. You just need to stop waiting for them to look. I was 24 when my father called me into his corner office at Rowan Industrial Systems. It sat on the 20th floor, all glass and polished steel, with a view of the bay that looked like success had been captured and framed. The air smelled like cedar and ambition. He didn't smile much, but that day he was in a good mood. Said he was proud, said the company needed new blood. Then he slid a folder across the table like it was just another contract, but the name on the top was mine. Vice President of Product Strategy, a six-figure salary, a reserved parking spot, a corporate credit card, a company-issued BMW. All lined up neatly, like a future someone else had already built and only needed me to step into. I think I was supposed to say yes before I even read the rest. I remember looking at the offer letter, not really reading the numbers. I was trying to feel something, but all I could sense was the weight of the room. His assistant brought sparkling water. Someone knocked politely to remind him of a board meeting. And still, all I could think was how loud it felt to be silent in a space so carefully controlled. There was a photo of me on the wall behind him, graduation, smiling, younger. I think he put it there to remind himself I was still his daughter, even if he didn't quite know who I was anymore. He said he'd cleared it with the board, that I'd have a team of 30 and they'd report to me by Monday, that this was a big deal and I should be grateful. But no one asked me if I wanted it. Not once did he ask what I was dreaming about. Not what I was working on, not what I cared about, not why I stayed up late in my apartment soldering battery packs together on a borrowed desk. It wasn't a conversation. It was a coronation, and I was the reluctant heir. I think he thought he was doing something generous, keeping me safe, giving me status legacy, the chance to prove I belonged in the world he'd shaped. But it felt like a golden cage, beautiful, impressive, locking me in, not letting me out. That afternoon, I drove the BMW home. They insisted I take it at least for the weekend. I sat in the driver's seat for almost an hour outside my building. Leather interior, Bluetooth, the engine so smooth I couldn't even feel it start. And still something inside me went cold. I imagined what 5 years would look like in that world. Me in suits, I didn't choose giving speeches. I didn't write signing deals I didn't believe in. I imagined all the people smiling at me because they thought they were supposed to. And I imagined the work I really cared about disappearing in some bottom drawer of my life. So I walked back inside, took the folder from my bag, and emailed my father my answer. Thank you, but no. He didn't respond. Not that day or the next. The BMW was gone from the garage by the weekend. I told myself I would explain if he asked, that I wasn't rejecting him. I just wanted something of my own, but he never asked. And in time, I realized he didn't want a daughter who chose differently. He wanted a daughter who agreed. It would have been easier to stay, to nod, to become what they expected. But every part of me knew that comfort isn't the same as purpose, and silence, no matter how velvet-lined, is still silence. My stepmother was the first to call after I turned down the offer. She didn't ask why, she just said I was ungrateful. That word sat between us like smoke. Not angry, not even surprised, just tired. Like she had already made up her mind and didn't care to hear mine. My father didn't call. He replied to my email the next morning with 5 words, "Do what you want, Tessa." We never talked about it again. There was no fight, no raised voices, no late-night phone calls asking me to reconsider, just quiet, like they had all agreed to remove me from the conversation without saying so aloud. At first, I tried to keep a small thread of connection. I sent cards on birthdays, a short email when I published a paper. I told myself maybe they needed time. But the silence stretched. It didn't hurt at once. It was slower than that. Like standing in a room where the lights dim so gradually you don't realize you're in the dark. I wasn't cut off, not exactly, I just wasn't called back. Invitations started arriving without plus ones. Group messages with my name missing. Holiday plans made without asking if I was coming home. It wasn't exile, it was erasure. Sometimes I thought maybe they were waiting for me to change my mind, to call and say I regretted it, that I was ready to come back and play the part they had written for me. But I never called, and neither did they. What I remember most about that year wasn't the tension. It was the space. How wide it felt between me and people I once saw every weekend. How empty it was to be right and still feel wrong. I kept telling myself it was worth it, that choosing my own path was the cost of being honest. But some nights the cost felt heavier than I expected. They didn't slam a door, they just stopped opening one, and somehow that silence stayed louder than anything they could have said. It started with a folding table in my living room and 3 friends who believed in a blurry idea. We didn't have a name yet, just sketches on whiteboards and a shared conviction that we could build smarter, cleaner energy systems for electric vehicles. The walls were thin, the fridge was always half empty, and someone was always soldering something past midnight. One of us slept on the couch more nights than not. We ate takeout with grant forms spread across the table and learned early how to fix problems we didn't cause. There were days we thought we had it, and days when a battery prototype sparked or failed or refused to charge, and we sat in silence pretending not to feel discouraged. The tech wasn't perfect, neither were we, but we kept going. I funded the first 3 months with my savings. I picked up contract work on the side and learned how to write patent claims at 2 in the morning. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even stable, but it felt like mine. Every decision, every failure, every line of code was ours. Not a boardroom's, not a legacy, ours. When it came time to incorporate, I didn't use the name Rowan. I didn't want it on the paperwork. I chose my mother's last name instead, Monroe. She had passed 3 years earlier. Quiet and gentle, she was never part of the corporate world. But she understood the quiet power of building something with care. She taught me how to solder and how to think with my hands before my words were ready. Using her name wasn't a statement, it was a thank you. Saluna became the name. We wanted something that sounded like light, like energy in motion. We didn't have investors yet, but we had a vision. Build modular energy systems that could power the entire fleet network cleanly and efficiently. There were weeks we missed rent, we borrowed tools. I once drove to Nevada to pick up salvaged components because it was cheaper than shipping. No one saw us then, no press, no praise, just long nights and quiet wins. But we were alive in the work. I never felt invisible in that room. Even on the worst days, I felt seen by the people building beside me. And that feeling carried me further than any job title ever could. When the first pilot system finally worked, it didn't look like much. A cluster of panels, wires, and software stitched together with trial and error. But it held power. It held possibility. That night, we turned off every light in the apartment and watched our system power the whole room. Just for a minute. Just to prove we could. I remember that glow. Not the brightness, the feeling, the warmth of knowing we had built something that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. That was the first time I said it out loud. Saluna isn't going to follow the old path. We're building our own. And somehow I knew we already had. The wired cover arrived on a Tuesday. I found it wedged between the electric bill and a grocery flyer wrapped in plastic like anything else meant to be glanced at and tossed. My name was printed across the bottom in small, clean font. Not Rowan, Monroe. The headline read, "The Silent Shift, How Saluna Energy is Reshaping the Future of Clean Transport." And just under it, a photo of me, standing in the lab beside our core battery prototype lab coat, open over a black sweater, hair tied back tight. I stared at it longer than I expected. Not because I didn't believe it was real, but because no one in my family would ever see it. We hadn't spoken in years. They didn't follow my work. As far as I knew, they still thought I was playing around with old circuits and pipe dreams. Meanwhile, our grid technology had just been picked up for a 12-state pilot program across the West Coast. Every autonomous fleet company we pitched now circled back within days. Every investor who once passed now returned with polite interest. We had something real, something essential, but they wouldn't know. I stood in the kitchen holding the magazine, the fridge humming behind me, and felt the weight of the silence again. All this time I had imagined what it might feel like for my father to say he was proud, for Nate to realize I hadn't failed. But the moment came without them. The world was noticing. The press, the partners, the people who didn't know the last name I wasn't using. But the ones who did know, they weren't looking. We framed that cover and hung it on the wall just outside the lab. Not as a trophy, just a marker. A way to say quietly we're not invisible anymore. I watched my team celebrate small and genuine. Ava brought donuts. Jordan made a toast with cheap coffee. I smiled with them. I laughed. I meant it. But part of me stood apart. Sometimes success feels lonelier than failure. Because it doesn't come with the explanations you once hoped for. It just comes, and you sit with who's not there to see it. Still, I felt it. That quiet pride. Not loud, not shining, just steady. Like the current that powered every prototype we built. We had earned our place. And even if no one clapped from the front row, even if no one said my name back home, I knew. I had done what they said I couldn't. I had built something that mattered, and it would outlast all their silence. The morning of the gala was quiet. The sky was overcast soft gray, pressing against the windows like it didn't want to be noticed. I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside my phone, waiting for the call I knew would come. At 9:12 it rang. Ava's name lit the screen. She didn't waste time, just asked if I was ready to go through with it. I didn't pause. I said yes. My voice was calm even to me. She didn't ask twice. Said she'd alert Ridgebrook's team and make sure the press kit was queued. Then she paused just long enough to mean something. Told me it was a good day to change the narrative. After we hung up, I stood still for a long moment. The kind of stillness that isn't hesitation, just the body catching up to a decision already made. Outside, the sidewalk was damp from early rain. Everything felt muted. I walked to my closet, pushed past the tailored dresses from old events I barely remembered, settled on a black sheath, simple and clean, no shimmer, no statement, just presence. At the bottom of my jewelry box, I found my mother's necklace, a brass pendant shaped like an infinity symbol. It wasn't expensive, the finish had dulled, but the clasp still worked. She'd given it to me the last winter we had together. Said it reminded her that strength didn't always need to be loud. I held it in my hand for a second before fastening it at my neck. I didn't wear anything else. Back in the mirror, I looked like myself. Not the daughter they used to dress up for fundraisers, not the girl they left off the guest list. Just me, the woman they never saw coming. The car arrived at 6, a black sedan rented like always. The driver didn't speak. I liked that. As we pulled onto the freeway, the city lit itself slowly, office windows turning gold against the dusk. I watched the skyline shift as we crossed the bridge. Familiar buildings, unfamiliar silence. The gala was being held at the Langford Club. Floor-to-ceiling windows, custom lighting, a ballroom that smelled like old money and floral contracts. I'd been there before years ago, shadowing my father at a corporate dinner. Back then, I had watched people work the room with practiced smiles. Tonight, I'd do something else entirely. My hand stayed steady, my breath even. But somewhere beneath it all, I could feel the thread tightening. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't spectacle. It was truth arriving on its own terms. And I was ready to speak. The Winmore Club glowed under amber chandeliers. Every surface shimmered, polished floors, glassware tall and thin, the kind of party where names held more weight than conversation. Laughter moved like background music. Familiar faces leaned in close, pretending not to watch each other while they judged cufflinks and champagne. The scent of lilies floated under notes of aged whiskey. I entered through the west side past the valet stand unnoticed. My heels sank just slightly into the carpet, but I didn't stop. I stayed near the wall, not hiding, just watching. My father stood near the band, straight-backed navy suit, hand on the shoulder of a city commissioner. Nate stood beside him, smiling tightly at someone too rich to ignore. Neither had seen me yet. To the left, Marlene sipped something pink and dry. Her dress shimmered under the lights like a warning. Her eyes scanned the room, the way a hostess checks for missing silverware. I let my gaze drift to the main stage. The podium stood tall and plain, draped in the club's insignia. Behind it, a projection screen waited like a curtain not yet raised. Just then, the room dimmed slightly. A signal, the clinking slowed. Conversations paused mid-laugh. The keynote speaker took the stage, Martin Kessler, Ridgebrook's founder, older, sharp-suited voice like a closing door. He spoke of innovation, of risk, of what it means to back something early and watch it grow. I could feel the energy shift. Investors tilted forward. My father nodded. Nate folded his arms. Then came the pivot. Martin began to describe a breakthrough, a new direction for sustainable fleet power, a partnership that would change the market. He said the name clearly, Saluna Energy. Heads turned, small murmurs began. I stayed still. And then he said mine. He thanked the founder, the mind behind the modular grid, the woman who had built what others dismissed. He looked straight into the crowd. Tessa Monroe, he said. For a breath, the room forgot how to move. My father's glass stopped midair. Nate blinked. Marlene's hand curled slightly around her clutch. You could feel the sound freeze in place. Martin continued, invited me forward. There was no music, no applause, just a subtle parting like the room itself made way. I walked slowly, measured. Eyes followed me, but I didn't meet them. I looked ahead. Near the front, my father stared like he'd seen something return from the dead. I stepped onto the stage. The lights weren't harsh. They felt warm. Martin smiled, said thank you, handed me the mic. And I stood there, in their world, but fully myself. Martin Kessler said my name, not the one my family used, the one I chose, Tessa Monroe. The lights above the stage warmed the air. I felt every step as I crossed the ballroom. Heels steady, eyes forward. My dress didn't shimmer, but it held shape. The pendant at my neck brushed lightly against my collarbone. The crowd parted with hesitation, like no one wanted to move first. No one wanted to be wrong. I reached the podium and looked out. I didn't need to search for their faces. My father, my brother, my stepmother, they were already staring. My father's jaw locked in place. A thin muscle pulsed at his temple. Nate's mouth opened, then closed. Marlene held her glass a little too tight, knuckles pale against the stem. Behind me, Martin turned slightly and spoke into the room. You raised her. That was all he said. It was enough. A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads leaned together. Names whispered under breath. Someone dropped a fork. I stepped closer to the microphone. My voice was calm, not loud, just clear. The energy tech your companies are betting on. The system's already powering fleets from here to Denver. You all thought it came from nowhere. I let that sit. It came from me. My eyes found my father's again. He didn't blink. 5 years ago, you told me to stop playing engineer and learn real business. When I brought you a prototype, Nate laughed. When I left to build Saluna, Marlene said I was abandoning the family. I paused, let the silence do its work. You all wrote me off, not out of cruelty, out of assumption, because I didn't want your path. You thought I had no path. Nate stepped forward from the crowd, hand raised like he could still stop this. Tessa, he said, don't do this. I didn't look at him. You don't get to rewrite what I lived, I said. Martin cleared his throat behind me. His voice returned neutral but undeniable. Saluna now holds the core patents behind the next phase of EV infrastructure, and Prescott Industries is about to fall behind unless it transitions. He turned to my father. Your biggest disappointment is now your only hope. The room didn't move, no applause, no objections, just stunned breath held in place. My father's lips parted like he might argue, but no sound came. I continued. This isn't revenge. I didn't come here to shame you. I came here to offer you a way forward. Because your company still matters. Because the people behind your walls deserve better than pride and memory. I saw something in his face shift, not surrender, not quite, but a crack. Martin spoke again. Saluna will acquire majority control. Prescott will survive, but not as it was. A murmur broke loose. Someone gasped. A name dropped audibly at the back of the room. Marlene set her glass down too hard. It didn't break, but the sound was sharp. Nate turned, face flushed. You can't just take it. Actually, Martin said we already have, and she gave you first refusal. He gestured to me again. She made sure her father's company was the first in line, even after all this. I stepped back from the mic and looked out once more. This could have been a quiet deal, signed papers, board meetings, but you taught me something when you stopped speaking to me. Silence doesn't protect the truth. It buries it. And tonight I stopped digging. No one spoke, no one moved. That was the moment it all turned. Not loudly, not with flames, just a shift. Power returning to its source. I stayed at the microphone as the room slowly breathed again. My hands didn't shake. My voice held. I had waited years for this moment, not to gloat, but to finally be heard. This afternoon, I said Saluna Energy finalized an agreement to acquire a 60% stake in Rowan Industrial Systems. The paperwork is complete, effective immediately. There was a pause. Not just shock, but confusion. A crack in the polished certainty that lined every inch of this ballroom. My father sat down slowly, like his legs weren't quite convinced. Nate stared at me, trying to read something he didn't understand. Marlene looked like someone had pulled the rug but left her standing. Martin stepped up beside me, calm and cool as ever. He addressed the crowd with the poise of someone who'd done this before. The truth is, Rowan Industrial has been bleeding. Market share, innovation, relevance. Saluna's technology is not just complementary, it is essential. He paused to let it land. And she gave you the first offer. I glanced at my father. Still nothing, still trying to find footing in a room that now moved around me. We didn't come here to threaten, I said. We came to offer a bridge. Saluna's systems are already being adopted across half the country. What we build is not an idea anymore. It's infrastructure. Martin nodded. And without this technology, Rowan will lose every competitive bid in the next 2 quarters. You need scale, supply, software, and you need it now. There was no arguing, no deals to counter. The deal had already been done. I turned to the guests, scanning the faces that had once looked through me. I have been building for years while you were remembering what I used to be. I never stopped working. I just stopped waiting. There it was, the quiet truth, not raised in volume, raised in value. What I built is real, tested, patented, scaling, and it's going to carry your old name into the next 10 years. I let that rest. Martin looked at my father. She didn't have to come back, but she did. That was the moment it finally showed in his eyes. Not defeat, something harder. Recognition. I gave one last look to the room, to every person who'd smiled at me in the past without really seeing me. Saluna is here to lead the next phase, and I'm not the footnote. I'm the author. Then I stepped back and let the silence speak. The terrace was quiet. The city stretched out beneath us, light soft in the distance. Inside, the gala still hummed, but out here, it felt like another world. My father stood beside me, hands in his pockets, shoulders lower than I remembered. He didn't speak for a while. Neither did I. We just listened to the muffled sounds of music and glasses clinking behind the glass doors. When he did speak, it came quiet, careful. You tried to show me once. Your first design. I didn't even look. I nodded. That part didn't need correcting. He looked down, cleared his throat. I was wrong, he said, about everything. I didn't rush to answer. Let the wind move between us. I wanted you to be proud, I finally said, but not at the cost of who I was. He didn't argue, just kept staring out across the skyline like it held something he had lost. You were always building, he said, even when I thought you were drifting. That stung more than I expected. I looked away. You never asked, I said, not once. He turned then, eyes full but steady. I thought I knew better. I thought I was protecting you. I shook my head. No, you were protecting the version of me that fit your world. Silence again, long this time. I'm proud now, he said, but it's late, I know that. The weight of those words sat between us, not heavy with guilt, just real. I didn't want him to hurt, but I needed him to see it clearly, not for me, for him. It wasn't about revenge, I said. It was about showing you I existed outside your plans. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough to feel intentional. You've done something remarkable, he said. I looked at him, really looked. I know. He smiled, but it didn't quite hold. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer right away. The wind picked up and I pulled my jacket tighter. Forgiveness isn't a door you knock on once, I said. It's something you walk toward, and it takes time. He nodded. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You don't need to fix it, I told him. You need to understand it. He looked tired, older than when I walked in tonight. Then what do I do? I watched him for a moment, felt all the years stretch out between us. Start here, I said, and then I paused. Can you learn from me? His eyes met mine. Something shifted. Yes, he said. That was enough for now. The next morning, I walked into the building I used to pass by without looking. The glass doors reflected the sky, but inside everything felt different. Not louder, just more honest. The lobby still held the same marble tile, the same echo when heels crossed it, but now the sign above the reception desk read something new. Saluna Rowan Energy Systems. The font had changed. Sleek. Clear. People looked up as I passed. Some nodded. Some pretended not to watch. I didn't need them to applaud, just to notice. The elevator ride was quiet. My reflection in the panel caught the edge of my necklace warm brass against black fabric. It felt right. When the doors opened, the floor smelled like fresh paint and faint coffee. My name had already been placed on the office plaque. No titles, just Tessa Monroe. I stepped inside. The space was larger than I remembered. Clean. Sunlight poured in from the east windows, warming the pale wood floor. There were files stacked neatly on the desk, a welcome note from the transition team, a small potted plant. I smiled. Then I opened my bag and pulled out the pendant's case. Gently, I set it beside the nameplate. A quiet promise. Not just to her, to myself. This wasn't a takeover. It wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. One I had built toward brick by quiet brick. I sat down in the chair and took a breath. The view was wide. The city moved slowly in the distance. People crossing streets, starting days. There was no celebration, no rush, just a calm knowing that I was ready. This wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about leading. Because the work was only beginning, and I was here now, where I was meant to be. The box was small, plain worn at the corners, taped twice, and labeled with my mother's name in faded ink. It had been tucked into the back of a storage closet in my apartment behind a stack of blueprints and old notebooks. Inside was her engineering textbook, the one I used to flip through when I was too young to understand half the equations. The pages smelled faintly of dust and old paper. Near the middle, she had marked a section with a folded piece of envelope. On the flap, she had written in her handwriting, neat slanted for Tessa, who will build in ways they won't expect. I just sat with that for a while, holding the page, breathing in the quiet, feeling the steady weight of her belief even years after she was gone. She had seen me, before anyone else ever truly had. I think about all the times people smiled at me with polite doubt, all the times I brought an idea to a table and watched it disappear the second I left the room. I used to wonder if maybe they were right, if I had misunderstood my own reflection. But I never stopped building. even in silence, even when no one asked what I was working on. I wasn't chasing proof, I was following something deeper, a sense that I had something worth making, even if no one else believed it yet. Now, when I walk into the office, there are people waiting to hear what I think. Investors, engineers, partners, and when I speak, they listen, not because I raised my voice, but because the work raised itself. I think we spend a lot of time waiting for someone to hand us a place, to say you belong here, but sometimes that place doesn't exist yet. Sometimes you have to shape it with your own hands. That's what Saluna became, not a rebellion, a response to every silence that tried to shrink me, to every moment someone decided I wasn't ready without ever asking what I carried inside me. There is peace in that, not pride, not revenge, just peace. My father and I still don't talk about everything, and maybe we never will. But when I speak now, he hears me. When I lead, he follows. That's enough. And I've learned something else. The light in you doesn't vanish just because someone fails to notice it. It doesn't dim just because they turn away. It keeps burning, quietly, steadily, until one day it lights a room so fully that even the ones who dismissed you have to pause and see it. So, if you're listening to this and you've been told you weren't enough, if your voice was talked over, your name overlooked, your dreams treated like detours, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. Your value isn't waiting in someone else's recognition. It's in the work, in the belief, in the trying, even when it's lonely. Have you ever been overlooked by the ones who should have seen you first? The ones who said they knew you, but never really asked what mattered to you? I have, and I promise that ache doesn't last forever. Because when you build from who you are, not who they told you to be, the world eventually shifts. The silence breaks. And the people who once looked past you have no choice but to see you clearly. My name is Tessa Monroe. I am the CEO of a company that didn't exist 6 years ago. I built it without permission, without applause, but never without purpose. And if no one's ever told you this, let me be the first. You don't need their spotlight. You are the light. So keep building, keep showing up, even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet. They'll see you eventually. And when they do, make sure it's on your terms.